So you heard me in a Clubhouse group speaking?
Yes.
Okay. If you don't mind, what's your name?
Christianlyn Sutton.
Can you spell that for me?
You know how to spell Christian?
Yeah, Christian.
Lyn.
Christian. Nice to meet you, Christianlyn.
Nice to meet you.
And you spoke something in regards to how I was dealing with my life, and it seemed to resonate with you.
Yeah, you was talking about having space for your father, keeping space for your father, and something about that caught my attention. And I was like, I want to know what he's talking about. How does he do that?
So, what rang true to you within that? Like me saying that, or is there something specific that
I think I don't know if you were having trouble with the relationship, but when I heard that, to me it rung to me because there is trouble in the relationships with my parents right now. So I still want to honor them how God wants me to, but there is some issues that prevent that. So I still want to hold space for them because they're my parents at the end of the day, and I want to show them honor. But how do you do that when there's so much dishonor?
So my value system on me communicating with my parents is that of the idea that I'm a father, and that I have an opportunity to recreate something that I believe in, which is healthy family values and a healthy family system. And within that, I believe that there's lots of intrinsic values, but when somebody's drunk or intoxicated and you're trying to talk to them and reason with them, there's no reasoning because they're intoxicated. And when two individuals have very powerful will systems, and you have one person that notices that there are two separate powerful value systems that are very willful, right? And only one side sees it and feels it and smells it and hears it and notices it, but the other side may not quite, within the discernment of the tango, be aware. What I found was that I can't speak for my parents. I can only speak for myself. And what I just said was only one facet of tuning myself to create and manifest the value system I was attempting to create and manifest. Which was honestly, like I said, it's okay.
Adjust my phone and hit the wrong button. My apologies.
It's okay. So holding space. Space is a very fascinating thing. If we also add in auditory space, physical space. So what I'm alluding to is for me, I went through a process over the last 3 years of my son being alive. And regulating space between my family system that I'm creating and manifesting and the family system that somebody else chose to create and manifest. And the two individuals have a different communication pattern. And I view it as an opportunity to decipher the most potent communication pattern for that individual in order for me to be able to decipher what way am I going to most potently communicate my intention. Because what I found in myself is that in the first 6 to 8 months of me attempting to reestablish this belief system of being a father, I was having a difficult time telling myself that I was dad now, because I
Right.
kept saying dad and hearing and seeing and feeling and experiencing my childhood, which was not lining up. And so as time
Right.
went on, I attempted to communicate verbally with two individuals that were already with parent conditioning, and it was already in the effect of, we know that this is how we communicate in all facets. But this was a new flower that came up, and I was attempting to utilize an outdated format within our dynamic of communication verbally, okay? And it took me months and months and months to find out, how am I to hold space for him so that
Right.
I can control myself, and that's it. And,
Okay.
and the
Was that a hard process for
it
you?
was very, very difficult, because he thought I was running away from him.
Okay.
And that was hard for me, because my intention was a long-term investment. Was that at one point, I didn't communicate to him for 6 months, but I communicated to him that I needed to not communicate to him to reestablish my value systems, and that I would not ever talk to him. So I made it very clear, and this is why I'm speaking, and I say the words like them or him, because in my mind, what assisted me was reestablishing the inner framework of how I was viewing. And this is what's silly, is that, like, I'm not a medical professional. I'm a certified hypnotist, and so I'm very familiar in my belief system and within my discernment of articulating family systems and how an individual is to become who they are and why they are and how they are, based off of the conditioning that the two parents had in order for that child to be modeled, right? And this was interesting, is that it's not by choice, it's by conditioning. But what I also believe is that when you're 18, you have the opportunity. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. And this is exactly what is happening now, is that you're in that potential level of discernment where you understand it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. And through the space-time continuum of Clubhouse, and I spoke out, and honestly, this is my intention, okay, is this here. I have a divine surrender within me where I chose a long time ago, and I say long, many years ago, in 2016, 2017, that I would place myself on the spot in order for other people to do what's happening right now. Is that I didn't talk to you directly, and I don't want to symbolize myself in any way, because I'm here to surrender completely 100% and articulate that there was some sort of systematic approach that I had, and the way that I reverse engineered attempting to articulate it was through what seems to be a process of tuning or aligning or justifying the facets that go into what created the relationship that you have now. Like, what was the inner working of the conditioning, how you guys communicated auditorily, physically, in body language, in the silence, when you guys shoot eye contact. I mean, like, there's lots of wonderful things that go into it. At the end of the day, what you drew to and what I drew to and why we're connecting is that one thing, is holding space.
Yes.
Is that he's your father, right? And just like mine is my father. And if I look at him in the sense of just imagining objectively removing myself as his son, and I view this person as somebody that went through trauma as a child, and then they tried their hardest to make a family based off of the tools that they were given from the trauma that their parents were trying to do, as well as, and there's this trickling down effect where when you look at the lineage of conditioning, and what helped me was asking questions to my dad too.
Okay.
Because the more that I understood his dad and the relationship that he had with his dad and his mom, and as he answered more questions for me over time, and again, I'm just jumping here and there because I'm trying to provide as much insight as to how it was that I was able to communicate the way that I did in order for you to discern that you want that space between you and your father because you love him, but you also can't. Sometimes you have a challenging time being in his presence. And so if we think about this on a primal and energetic level, and we remove words, there are two people barking at each other, okay?
Yes.
And neither one of them are potentially having the ability to discern that if there were space for 10, 15, 30 seconds, it would allow the idea that father, daughter, love, but the barking is drowning everything out because it's a potential outdated form of communication and aligning or tuning or gathering the new format of value system. Because what has happened is you are at your age and your development and your wisdom and your experience, and you have gone out into the world and blossomed and found all these other perspectives in different generations and different people. And then you come back to your father and it gives you a different potential perspective of communication for him, so that when you're talking to him, his value system, he doesn't have the same conversations that you had with all these other people.
Right.
And so you're just citing stuff off in these new value systems. For him was like, how I'm 70 years old, don't change my ways. Right? And it's funny to you because and it's funny to me too because my dad still says it. But and here, this is what's challenging. Like, I'm 28 and I'm here to surrender again. Like, I don't know, but I'm familiar of trends. Okay. And when I taught gymnastics, I managed a program. I had hundreds of boys that would come in. I managed a recreational boys program, and they were anywhere from the ages 5 years old up to 17 years old. And over the span of the 4 years, most potently this is what I learned in this almost this tribal effect of providing space for people to have that internal conversation. Because if there's two people that are barking and you're drowning out the own internal dialogue, which again, we're tuning things, we're aligning things, and how you're arriving, right? If you're not in tune with your own instrument and you arrive into the orchestra of the old song that was going on, and your trombone is tuned in a different key than everybody else, and the conductor's like, so much so that there's a different communication in that band. You were in a different band. You were marching to a different beat. Now you went out into the world and you created your own beat. That's what's so important here, that I believe, is that it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with your father. And I believe that this has everything to do with what's happening right now, is that you're in a position in your life where you've contemplated things, and now you've gone through these phases of yourself where literally, we're going to speak on terms now, you are ready to be interviewed, because this is what's happening. Because you went out into the world, right? You fell from this tree and it was a wonderful apple and it grew and your parents gave you everything you needed. And then when it was time for you to roll down the hill, you found all these wonderful things and you came back to the tree and you said, look at all these things that I found, and these value systems, and I believe them, and this is what yada, yada, yada. And the tree shook because they're not familiar with that other genome of tree.
That makes perfect sense.
So where we're at now, and this is what I found beneficial and why we're having this conversation, I believe, is that I had a very challenging time regulating my temperature, my emotions. That is what I found, is that at 18, it was no longer my fault. It is now my responsibility. And if I am allowing my father to trigger me, it has nothing to do with him. And it has everything to do with the ideology of, I came from his tree and I have an opportunity to use the tools or utilize the tools that I was conditioned in. Now, you can use your tools and go, "Arr, arr, 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 arr," because that's you in your potential old. And I'm going to say use, which is stagnant and potential, that there's potentially no movement, versus utilize. And if you're utilizing, you're in constant motion and you're in constant understanding that you will be constantly utilizing. For me, I am going in a constant utilization process of growth. I'm never, not never. I'm at a point now where I'm not interested in saying I'm whole, I'm one. I'm this word that has a potential energy attached to it. Mm-hmm. And this is why, again, so many whys here. You and I are having this conversation because you're in that motion. You feel that love, and you're just like, I love you, Dad. And you are discerning that in the moment of this happening, what's happening is you detach from your body and you hyper associate to the situation objectively, and you're going, this is not what my intention is.
Right.
So I put my hand on my heart, as I just did. Mm-hmm. And I'll do that in front of my father, because that wraps my bubble. And if you want to talk about it in terms, for some people, it wraps your aura. You're kind of complete. And so I counseled with someone recently, and they said, in helping me with this, it's almost divine. It's a pastor at a church, and I sought him out for divine intervention and not religion. And I called him, and he provided the exact thing that I needed, which I've been so propelled to tell everybody, and it seems that this is what's most potent, is that if in this, you can take it how you want. If you imagine yourself as a thermostat, and your father is a thermostat, and your mother is a thermostat, and those two thermostats came together and decided that we're going to become one temperature together, and that if we fluctuate, then we're going to figure out how we communicate together and match our temperatures. Now, if they have beneficial or non-beneficial communication patterns, it may be a structure that one person's temperature is always here and one person's temperature is here. And if that's modeled for you, and you see every once in a while that the temperatures, they bark at each other, and they stay here for a month and then bark, and then they stay here for 3 months or 6 months. And so you understand that it's a very interesting cyclical opportunity for growth. And this is here, right? And so that's the opportunity, is that you're viewing the reverse engineering of all of the makeup of objective person. And that's why you're speaking to me in this way, is that you objectively see your father as a loving being of light, but you also objectively see that how you're currently communicating to him based off of the modeling that you were provided in your divine guidance of the chapter of your book, you're here, and I wrote my father a letter. And I took him out to dinner, and I made him read the letter in front of my stepmother and my son, and it was in a restaurant, and I made it clear to him that I was inviting him, and I was very articulate, and it took me 6 months to write this letter and to build up this courage to call him back and really articulate what I understood was the bear at that point in time in my growth, and what I understood was non-biased, and I attempted to do this with space. Because if I'm sitting here barking at him and he's barking at the same time, then he's not even listening to what I'm saying, and he's also not listening to himself. And this is what's interesting, is that the dialogue with self is out the window because you're barking. Now what's happening now is you are at your point in discerning and seeing all these other perspectives and more conditioning in your growth, that this is an opportunity. And you can this is what's interesting, you can either be potential or kinetic. You could be potential and cut it off. You could not talk to him ever again. And I hear people doing that. And that breaks my heart. Because
that's where I am with him. Well, because it's my mom and my dad. When there is eight children total between the two of them. My dad has 5 kids. Then my mom has kids, but she has some adopted children. So the total of all of us is 9 total kids, including myself. So my dad and mom divorced when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. From that, we moved with my father and stayed with him. My brother and me and 2 of my siblings stayed with my father during the school year. And then during the summer times, we would stay with my mom and the other siblings. And then there's one sibling that was not a part of the family at all, from a different marriage. And when that happened, for me as a child, there was so much going on that was not understandable for me to be able to process and understand the separation between my parents. But I was the child that had the opportunity to be with them for 8 or 9 years before they divorced. So my 2 younger siblings, now as an adult, I'm a mom now too, of an 11-year-old, and I am creating my dynamic, or what I feel is a healthy family system, and I want everybody to be a part. But because the younger siblings came in the midst of the turbulence and the separation, it creates friction whenever I speak. And so with my dad, I've gotten to a point where I've just cut him off. Like, I don't want to do that, but I've had to do that because his way of doing stuff is to have conversations with the younger siblings and make them feel that I'm doing something against him, which to him maybe it feels that way. And then my mom, I talk to her more often. I see her more often. We see each other, but there's still a disconnect in communication, basically from what you explained today. And so even to a certain extent, I'm separating myself from her because there's just too many different thought processes. There's too many different tunes in the band, and it's just not working. But it hurts me to do that because my daughter is the only grandchild, and she needs them just as much as I need them, and we need each other. But because there's so many different tunes in this band, it's so difficult. And then on top of that, the father of my child and I are not on one chord. So it just creates a whole lot of dynamics. So when I heard you talk about that, I'm like, wow, at some point in my life, no matter what the strife and discourse was, I love these people with unconditional love. But they have conditions for me that sometimes feel unbearable. And I'm not able to get a voice in. But I'm a replication of what they taught me coming up, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. And with my father, he doesn't communicate his feelings. He doesn't express himself well and check in. And that's it. There's no personal relationship. There's nothing. It's always been like that, even when we were children, when I was younger. He never did too much talking. Then my mom has always been the more expressive one when it comes to talking or whatever. So anything that I needed to understand about my dad, my mom filled that blank in, but my dad has never had those type of conversations. He holds a certain social status and a certain level of stature that sometimes I think doesn't allow him to connect with his kids or other people. So it's just a lot. It's just like, man, how are we going to get through this? So I've gotten to a point, like, I'm just like, okay, well, if he can't meet me halfway, I just have to walk away.
So if we think about this in organizational terms, let's say that your father, okay, and your mother have two different thermostats, and that creates you, okay? Within their thermostats, they have multiple forms of communication in this space right here. And it is directly affecting you and how you are going to go out into the world and communicate with yourself and others, as well as how you're going to go back and communicate to her and to him. And if you are seeing that your father, his instrument of voice, as you said, didn't talk so much, but mother would fulfill his thoughts, then you're familiar with that pattern of when you communicate to him, you may feel that it's beneficial in some sense to communicate to him similar to how it was modeled to communicate to him, to fulfill his thoughts, okay?
Right.
I don't know. I'm just speaking in terms of modeling and potentials.
That's spot on. That's how we do it.
He speaks a lot in his head if he stays quiet, because he waits for his turn to speak what he has said so profoundly. And I don't know him again, but that seems to be why he is in his reserve, based on what you're saying and how you articulate that doesn't talk so much. Mother would fulfill his speaking. So this is what's interesting, okay? And again, I'm not a medical professional, and I submit, and this is just my understanding of trends and data, is that one thing that sits dear with me, and I'm attempting to wrap my head around in my life, is the word enablement. And if somebody has a unbeneficial pattern of not communicating, and the other person is enabling them to not communicate and reassuring that that lack of communication is beneficial, neither of them know. They're drunk. They're intoxicated. And so there's no reasoning with them in their current format of communication.
Right.
However, people read. And so when you write a letter to someone, there's a lot of things that happen when they read it by themselves, okay? Then there's a massive amount of pressure that happens when they read it in public, because there's a reserved response and forced articulation on them really, really absorbing. Now, I only did this once, and I believe that it was very, very beneficial, okay? And I'm going to read it to you,
okay,
so that you have an idea of what was going on for me and how I articulated for him. And it was Father's Day. It was my first Father's Day ever, being father, okay? Yeah. And I had spent months preparing for the idea that I was becoming dad, and I was detaching the other vision of dad and father and all of those other feelings and thoughts and sounds. And I speak in these terms because it's not just one thing. There's so many different facets that you may tune or align or gather in conjunction for your system, for Christianlyn, and not anybody else, not mine, because I just have a story that one facet of my story of Stephen Nicholas Israel lined up with one facet of your story as Christianlyn, and you went, hey. And there's one thing that you said in here that's very potent. I am creating. You're taking advantage of the opportunity now, in the moment.
Yes.
I didn't message you on Clubhouse. You messaged me. Yeah. You like that's amazing, and I am very grateful. I'm getting goosebumps.
That's awesome. Yeah, because what you were saying in that moment when you were talking, and I wish I had a recorder so that I could hear it again. But I said there's something he's saying. I need to reach out to him because he has the key to my puzzle, or he has the dot that I'm missing, or the line from the dot that I'm missing to the puzzle, because my mind has been captivated and trying to understand my parents, trying to hold space and not know that I'm holding space, because I don't want them to feel like I am doing away with them. I still love them, although they're separated, divorced, they don't talk to each other. It's always been an up and down battle. You're in between two parents that birth you that don't communicate with each other well, but you still love both of them, and you don't want them to feel like you're choosing one or the other. And I don't know, it was just something you said. I said, I got to reach out to him, because he's telling me something through his own ordeal, his own experience, that's going to help me cross the ladder or cross the bridge with them. And help them understand me. And
then continuously cross bridges as bridges come. This is the big thing, is that it's not potential. It's not stagnant. You are in kinetic. You're here in motion. You've been in motion since you got out of the house. And then when you came back, and you're still in motion, and you're not giving up. Like, that's what's so cool. That's what You're doing great.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for helping me to understand some things, because it's so important. Even when you have your own child, whether your upbringing is toxic and dysfunctional, you don't want that for your child. And unfortunately, my daughter has had to experience the first 11 years of her life in constant dysfunction on multiple sides. And I want to create a level field for her, so she can understand, so she can still be a part, even if the relationship doesn't progress to what I would like it to be. I still want her to have them as long as they're living, because that's an important part of her life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to read this to you really quick, okay?
Okay.
The idea with
that
this
was beautiful.
was thank you so much. The idea with this was that I was attempting to reach him in a form of communication that I was familiar he utilized. He reads lots of books. And when I speak to him about his books, he uses that instrument of voice very profoundly and comfortably with conviction. But when you communicate to his emotions with voice, and he's not tuned to vocalize his emotions, then what comes out is a compensation, because that was what was modeled from him, and how his modeling was, how do I communicate my emotions? When emotions come out, I do this because this is what it was shown to me. Mm-hmm. We have an opportunity here to remove yourself from yourself, remove yourself from your family, and then become, and then unbecome, and then become, and then unbecome. Because what's happening is you're attempting to shift the literal vibration of the bloodline. You are, I believe that what you and I are doing somehow, some way in this conversation is shifting generational trauma. There is generations upon generations upon generations of conditioning that has led to you and I in the conversation that we're having. And if I look into what you say, okay, trying to understand my parents is where I was going non-beneficial. Is because I wasn't kinetic. I was potential, sitting still, looking at somebody else potential sitting still, attempting to understand them and the inner workings of how I could potentially communicate them to pull them. But what I could do is I could now just vibrate and regulate my own temperature and set up a system for myself. And I'm going to go over there. This is what I did one time a month in the beginning. That's what I did. I'm going to see you one time a month.
That makes sense.
And I went and saw him. And I made it clear that, like, I wrote him the letter, and then with the letter, it was very articulate and clear that, like, I'm a man. I have a schedule. I have a job. I'm not a child. I'm not going to be coming over here every single week. I'm not, and I'm speaking in terms of the relationship and the dynamic that I have. In the dynamic that you have, it seems that you're interested in potentially shooting some new form of communication to develop holding space.
Yeah.
You see that currently the way you and your father and you and your mother, now that you've brought your mother into it, now the way that you three all hold space with each other, you're discerning it's no longer beneficial. What was once beneficial is no longer. Because it was once beneficial, but now it's no longer.
Right.
And then what's so cool is that potentially in 5 to 10 years, this conversation, you'll learn that this conversation, what was once beneficial, is no longer. And this is why I submit and surrender, because I don't believe in the title stuff, and it's like wonderful and it's great, but that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the benefit of humankind, because we're all units. We're all together. Yeah. But miraculous, and I say this word, miraculously, we've been given an opportunity to have an immense amount of growth.
Right.
And ultimately, if you were to view the statements that you made in this conversation and take your parents out and place yourself, and that's where you could potentially start in providing space for yourself to understand where you are and how you will approach the next entrance, and then how you will detach from said entrance if the tree starts vibrating at a specific rate that you are not interested in. Because you were the apple that fell from the tree that was vibrating and making the song. And the apple rolled over here. And it created a different song and all these other trees, and you created your own individuality. And then you had a child and you rooted your tree over here. And now you're the tides and the tectonic plates, you're attempting to shift your tree to be in the same yard as this tree. But while you're over here, this tree's vibrating, and they're not, here's what's fascinating, they're not kicking you out. That's just what they're familiar with.
Okay.
And you're over here and you're like, because that's what you're familiar with. But what's so fascinating is that you went out and got all these tools and came back, and so you have a fascinating perspective, ultimately, to trigger the f*** out of them. And I'm going to use that word powerfully. My profanity I utilize in a sense that it is lots of power that's happening within the subliminal nature of the words that we're saying.
Yeah.
Because
it's perfect how you're saying it and the words you're saying it, because I've been experiencing it, like actively experiencing the positive and negative reaction.
It's not, hear me out, and I'm going to interrupt. Hold on, I'm going to interrupt because this is where we go. It's not positive and negative. That perspective of positive and negative is a potential. If it's beneficial or non-beneficial, it provides room for perspective. Because if they don't know what's positive or negative, and you feel like you know what's positive or negative, the conjoining factor that creates disconnect is that you both think and know. Well, if you both know, then you're both potentially just two blind trees that are never going to connect to anybody but themselves, because your knowingness is knowing your own potential root system.
Okay.
But what you did, what's so cool, and I'll commend you, is that you had, within all of what you just said, there's bleeding linguistics in how you speak, where you're providing opportunity for growth. I am creating. I have an opportunity. I am manifesting. But you also speak other terms where it's potential. It's fascinating because it's still motion. Because you're in a point, like I said, where you're potentially in that phase past contemplation and past pre-contemplation, and you're in action. Yeah. You're like, you're doing the unbecoming becoming, and I'm using that word so much now because it's so wonderful. And it really is articulate. And I learned it from someone else on Clubhouse, and I'm sure that they learned it from someone else. And it's a beautiful thing that words can travel and reverberate and connect to people. And ultimately, when have you last connected with yourself in trying to understand yourself and how you react to your parents? And
I constantly do that on a regular basis. I would say today was the last time, earlier today was the last time I'm just sitting thinking, how am I going to establish myself without them, without their guidance, without their whatever makes it easier? How am I going to do that? And to an extent, I feel stuck.
Do you feel stuck right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Write down on a piece of paper. Write down in the middle of the piece of paper, write down your name, just your first name.
Okay.
And then write a line below it, and then write stuck. Okay?
Okay.
And then write a line below it, and then we're going to chat really quick on what it is that you're stuck on, because it seems that you're attempting to provide space for your father in some way. And in some fashion, the intention is, I have a daughter. At the bare bones of this tribal conversation, generational type stuff that you and I are doing here, it's very profound. You have a father, you have a mother, they are a grandfather, they are a grandmother. And you are approaching this in a militant manner. You look right now with your eyebrows and discernment, with the power, I believe, I don't know what your religion is, but you have an enormous amount of power within you to be approaching this way. That you're like, I get it. I see through all of it. And you almost, through all the yelling and he's screaming, it's almost as if you want to hug him or hold his heart. Because you get the conditioning. So, what all of I just did, and you saying yes, is communication. Do you agree?
Say that last part. Communicate.
Is that what you feel stuck on? Is it communication?
Yes.
Okay. So, what we were talking about earlier is that the format of communication I utilized was no longer beneficial, and let's put that on the left, because I was attempting to communicate in a way that was no longer beneficial.
Okay.
And when that subject matter comes up and the temperature shifts in the room, you and I were attempting to communicate verbally.
Yes.
Okay. So on the left, we'll put verbal, because that in that moment was no longer beneficial, as we had so deciphered that when it came down to your father communicating emotions, he doesn't communicate. And when the emotions do start to come out, it seems that there is something happening where you don't feel like it's beneficial. You can't control him. You can have the opportunity to control yourself. And so the invitation here is to write something. So there's an opportunity for you to dabble in a different format of communication when you discern that the subject matter within that space gets to X. Okay?
Okay.
Now, I wrote him one time, okay? And that is what worked for me in my value system, in the tribe that I came from, in the intrinsic value of the generational trauma that we came from, and all of the abuse and neglect and all of the things that happened that came down, all of the blood and vibrated to make me and to make you, okay?
Right.
Now, I don't know how this is going to work for you, right? Because that's why I submit. We just have an understanding that you and I are having a conversation where we have two paths within all the millions of paths that we've gone down in our life, where we can connect in full love and conviction here and can conversate and say, you did this, hey, let's see if this works together, okay? Now, write a line really strong between verbal and writing, like almost as if you're about to put a crease through the paper and then let go, and that line is going to be space.
Okay.
Because you communicating verbal is beneficial and you writing is beneficial. But you've discerned that at some moments in conversation, verbal communication is no longer beneficial because of the subject matter.
Right.
Okay, so below that, we're going to put subject matter, right below that strong line. And when you discern that when the subject matter gets to a point where the verbal communication is no longer beneficial and you're feeling the need to shift the tone and you're like, how do I do this? I physically displace myself.
Okay.
I have managed lots of organizations, and within my management, it has helped me tremendously providing 3 articulate strikes in a very politically correct format, where it's all I statements, and it has nothing to do with you. And if you listened to a lot of what I said in that letter, it took me 6 months to make it all as best as I could I statements until I said one thing that said, I forgive you for your actions. Because that's the only thing that I know about him, is that he is a person and that he had actions, and I forgive him. And within my process of forgiveness, I discern that his communication within subject matter, his verbal format of communicating that subject matter gets out of temperature. And then your conditioning is to follow that temperature, because that's what you saw within your mother and your father, is that they follow each other's temperature because that was their version of love, and that was their version of passion, and that was their song and their orchestra, and that was how they made their tree and put their tree in the root system, and that was how they made your apple. And then you had the apple, and you went out and created your own tree and root system. And I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is cycling, because I'm continuously recreating these visuals inside your head so that you realize how potent of nature and power you have. Okay? There is a lot of intrinsic value in what I'm doing, how I'm talking to you, and the process that I'm providing. Okay? And if you'd like to go read into it, it's pretty fascinating. And I don't claim it. I owe it to, I want to say God, because I died, came back to life, and have some odd discernment in listening to people speak. And I just ask tons of questions until I get to the point where ultimately, like you just said, I'm Christianlyn. I felt stuck with communication. I discern now that my father has a difficult time verbally communicating his emotions. And now I, Christianlyn, have an opportunity to format a new version of potential reaching him. That maybe now I can hold space for the opportunity. And when I arrive into his presence the next time, I can show him love. And the minute that I deem that the conversation and whatever happens becomes unbeneficial, and that it's not beneficial, ultimately, this is the primal down tribal here, is that we are setting a tone for our child. And if we don't respect our parents, our child is not going to respect us. And this is why I am so potent on this subject right here, is that with everything that I do in this process, always comes down to the parents and the relationship that that individual has with themselves. And ultimately, that reflects the relationships that the parents had with themselves and how those parents treated each other. Because that was that intrinsic dynamic value that instilled you and I to be who we are. Okay?
Yes.
I do not like that word hacking. I really, really like tuning. Because we are all in beat. We all have heartbeats. We are all instruments of God. We're all divine beings playing our own heartbeat, having our own blood flow, and a polyrhythmic manner of being around each other. And what happens is your polyrhythm went away from the tree, you came back, and your polyrhythm is vibrating differently. But you have an opportunity within the intrinsic value of everything you learned when you left and came back, is that now the divine within you is seeking the difference here. So rather than feeling stuck, and rather than feeling like you have two options, I can only read, or I can only write him something, or I can only tell him something, there are many, many, many other instruments. I brought Jenga over to my father's house last night with my son, which is his grandson, because I thought to myself, let's add in a new instrument of communication. Let's all look at a game. My son is 3. I'm 28. My dad is 72. Okay? English is his second language. He was born and raised in Poland, and he moved to Brooklyn when he was however young he was. Okay?
Yeah.
So I have an understanding based off of the conditioning that he has that communication for him is not as well versed as communication is for me in English, because I was born and raised in English, and English is his second language. So there's a big difference there, right? Yeah. And so that was a big part of me writing this letter, was choosing, because it was an opportunity, choosing to articulate the I and the feeling, and ultimately so that I could be heard. Because the ears that were in tune, if you write hearing next to verbal, the hearing was not there. Right. So the instrument within the instrument, you had this orchestra of your father, and your father has that instrument of speaking, but he also has the instrument of listening. And then there's also different formats of speaking and listening. When people talk, are they listening? When people yell, are they listening? When people are quiet, are they listening? When people are silent, are they listening? Now, what is your definition of listening? Are you actively listening, or are you picturing? Because if that was the conditioning that was provided, that when I'm listening to you, I'm picturing the idea rather than listening to the word, they're both potentially beneficial, they're both potentially non-beneficial, depending on the perspective. And that's what's so fascinating, because we're all divine.
Yeah.
And what my intention here is that, as you said, you're here, you have this one thing, there was this one thing that you used to do, there's other things that you could do, and you're in motion.
Right.
That's the idea. Because if you go back and you feel stuck, you use that word stuck. Replicate the process. Where are you at? What is this option that you're doing now that's non-beneficial? What's the option that may be beneficial in your perspective? What is between non-beneficial and beneficial? Like, for everything, format it. If it's your daughter and you're having some sort of something with your daughter, write it down. Your name, and then stuck, and then it's communication, and then it's your daughter, and the subject matter is X, and you notice that when you communicate to her verbally with the subject matter that's X, you're understanding that potentially that conditioning is an opportunity for me to reestablish new versions. So you said something, you said, it's unfortunate what my daughter went through for the last 7 years. And I see it as beautiful, because she has come from the mud, and her lotus flower is going to bloom with everything that you have and more. Imagine that the intrinsic value that you're doing right now is already within her. Because when she stays silent and she hears and feels and experiences you showing your dad unapologetic love, unconditional support and passion, through all the screaming, through all the yelling. Because you're here having this conversation for a reason. It's not me, it's you.
Right.
I'm here asking questions and providing insight as to. It seems to be that this is the perspective if we were to break it down. And when we broke it down and we looked back into the past, and then we continued to go back and forward and went back into the past, this process of you going up and back and down and over and up was literally you placing yourself in a state that you've been doing your entire life to learn things. And people like to call it hypnosis, because they like to attach a service fee to it and feel the necessity to create monetary value of, I'll do it once, but you got to come back to continue. I don't believe that, because my heart didn't sit well after I got certified. So I didn't do it. So I tried to create this, giving you a perspective of primal, tribal, this really just, if we broke this down and looked at it of, let's remove ourselves and think about this. And within all of that, ultimately, you're recreating a conditioning process for yourself that you just parented yourself in the last 36 minutes. We just went through reconditioning. You went back and time traveled, and I watched you dissociate from current reality and re-experience all of these profound events. And your face, in your body, and how you felt the first time you went back in time was different than now.
Yes.
Because that is what was happening, is that you were so caught up in this current moment. And you were in this potential, hitting this door, looking external. I'm trying to understand my father, and I can do it. But now what I just did is potentially, if we view this as a stale rubber band, and I had a conversation with you, and based off of the conversation, we lubricated the band. Maybe I'll get a better word, lubricate.
Yeah.
And you pull the rubber band back, and now it's no longer stale. It's in motion.
Yes.
And every time you go back, you're working that muscle up, because you understand that you're in here and you got yourself here, and you have an opportunity to continue to go forward as you've done previously. Because Christianlyn did so many things in your life. You graduated high school, you went to wherever you went, you had this job, you had a child, you're still moving forward. There's many, many accomplishments that you did in your life. And what just happened in the last 36, 37 minutes was a fast-tracked version of you learning something. This is what I wholeheartedly believe, is that you went through parenting from your parents to condition you to have the things that you have. What I'm attempting to do is to speak in ways for you to discern that there's an opportunity for you in front of you. And the only way that this works is for individuals that seek it out.
Yeah.
This does not work for people that do not come like you just did. And you messaged me. And that's why I say it in that format of, you were past contemplation, you were past pre-contemplation, you were in this state, in this format of understanding action and becoming and unbecoming. Because before you came to me, you tried your own system, you tried your own process, and you kept going back, and you kept doing these things. And I went through a very similar process myself. And I kept reading and doing these things and Googling here and researching this and
like
talking to these people.
In circles,
And what I came to find was that it's communication. He reads lots of books. I'm going to choose to communicate to him in a format that potentially is beneficial and it's understood. But then I have to understand, no. But then I'm going to choose to understand that it's a constant process of becoming and unbecoming. Because I'm not going to just go to him and write him a letter and expect him to change. Because I'm not changing him. I'm changing myself. And what I changed is the understanding that I can communicate in a different way. I don't always have to yell when somebody modifies my temperature. Because if I were a thermostat and my dad was a thermostat and he gets really hot and I choose to follow his heat, or I can say to him, Dad, I don't feel comfortable with how I'm being spoken to. That was my first internal strike one, is that I said an I statement. Dad, I put my hands up. This is energy stuff here. I mean, if you believe in it, I believe in it. You put your hands up and submit to him. So you understand that when he's here and his body and his head is over, and now we're talking about some wonderful things, you can repel it. Just, you know what? Take a deep breath. Dad, I love you. I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable with the way I'm being spoken to. I don't feel comfortable. So I'm articulating me that has nothing to do with you when I'm being spoken to this way, because I didn't say anything about you.
Right.
Christianlyn, this is a long process that I've worked on, is removing the word you with my parents, because I still do it now. And you hear me, and this is why I submit, is that I'm a human doing work in my own family. And so, I'm providing vulnerability here because I'm me.
Yeah, you know? I like that you say that you remove the word you, because I know I don't talk much to my dad, but when I talk to my mom about childhood experiences and stuff that has affected me, I've heard her say to me, "You're blaming me. You're blaming your dad. You're doing a lot of blaming." And in my mind, I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm not blaming anybody."
That's beautiful. So we're going to go insight into what you just said, okay? How you speak about your past is how you parent yourself. What you and I just did is time travel, potentially, to reparent, recondition, reaffirm, and then reparent and recondition and reaffirm and then reparent. And that's why I brought you back so many times, because that was the ultimate parent conditioning, is that the first time you went back in time is different than the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th time that you go back in time, because now you're so comfortable and confident with communicating with your baby Christianlyn to understand and discern that in that moment, Christianlyn had nothing to do with your parents. And you had everything to do with yourself. And the challenging part now is that exactly is what you just had that conversation with your mother. You're not intending in your own personal communication pattern of, I'm not blaming you. Because inside your mind, you have these train cars that are going 500 miles per hour. But the way that you're articulating it in your current tuning of the instrument of the that's a third instrument, internal dialogue versus hearing versus speaking. There's lots of things. And then you have the things in conjunction together. So if you're having an internal dialogue of how you believe to be what's happening, and you're speaking to your mother, and what comes out is the depiction of the image rather than the depiction of your emotions.
Right.
So what's coming out is your understanding of the conditioning that was provided to you on ultimately how your mother or your father spoke about their parents and their trauma. And this is why I said to you that speaking to my father about his mother and father gave me insight as to how I was speaking about my mother and father.
That makes sense.
Did that happen overnight? No. I still love having conversations with my father. And it is a constant becoming and unbecoming process. Because where you were 7 years ago, you were not ready to ask and have this type of conversation. Because you were so compelled and willful and powerful in yourself, and I believe this because I did the same thing, that you could do it.
Yeah.
And now you're here in the collective consciousness of love and divinity, and you say, I'm gonna manifest that in my life, divine guidance will provide me with an individual that has one tiny little facet of experience that them and I can communicate, and I'll get a grain, a little nugget. And the little nugget that I have for you is the process of what just happened, like I said, in the last 35, 45 minutes. You've been doing it your whole life. You've been tuning yourself for what you deemed to be beneficial based off of what your parents conditioned you by modeling of what they deemed to be beneficial. And what you're doing now is recreating the beneficial value system for Christianlyn and the Christianlyn tree and all the apples that are in it.
Yes, that's beautiful. You've been so helpful. I feel like I've done a transformation just in this time that we've talked. I'm listening to what you said. I received it because you've used words that are familiar to me, that I've researched and I understand so clear. So now I feel like when I have that powwow moment with myself, I will no longer feel stuck, for one, because I can release the accountability and responsibility that's been placed on me since childhood. I can release that back, and I can communicate with them.
So hear me out, and here, this is where it's interesting, as this is where the interrupting comes in. It's really fascinating. Was it placed on you?
Yeah, I think so.
And is it a choice now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
To
and so be depictive, because if you have the power to manifest what's happening right now, okay, then you also have the power to articulate the word, because the trains that are fleeting in 500 miles per hour are really, really vivid in here. And if you add that second instrument of speech on top of this instrument, the power of that manifestation is that much more. Your song is that much more harmonious. And what happens ultimately is monkey see, monkey do.
Yes.
If you're happy, people will see it. So this has nothing to do with your parents. And this has everything to do with you, how you take care of yourself, how you regulate yourself, how you wake up, how you go into the week, how you go into the weekend, how you go into the month, how you wake up in every day, how you speak about yourself, how you speak about your past self, how you speak about what you're doing for your future self, how you speak about your grandparents, how you speak about your kid, because ultimately, again, tribal, really intrinsic value here is you have no control over your daughter right now. You have full control over yourself. And every move you make is the modeling system that will go into your daughter to have potentially a non-beneficial or beneficial conversation just like this in 25 years.
Whoa, that's powerful.
What are the actions that you're doing now? And it's not just actions. What are the thoughts that you're doing? What are the internal dialogues that are happening about your past? That's the biggest thing, is the self-parenting of love. And I believe that you say these things, it's wonderful, and I'm going to submit again, because you said such powerful things, and you spoke in ways. It's because that's the system. It has nothing to do with me. I listened to your linguistics, and I wrote notes of how you spoke about yourself. And I went in and I just said, here's an opportunity for you to tune. And it had nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you, because you were in that phase of action. You weren't contemplating. You weren't pre-contemplating. You're here in present moment listening to every word that I'm saying. Because I've tried this process on other people that are not ready. They are not at that phase of communication where you are at. And the session will just keep going.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because that's where that person is. That's what's beneficial for them. And it's not beneficial for me to try to change them by keeping the session going, by having them come back every single week, every single month. That hurt. That doesn't hurt. I have these feelings that I don't know if it's hurt or pain. I don't want to articulate it as that, but when I hear that, and I it just sits. It sits deep.
Yeah. Well, through your skill set and through my ability to understand and comprehend everything you said, through me knowing that I'm entering back into divine order, everything in this moment has been divinity, and I believe the angels are happy because I can leave here comfortable and free, knowing that it's my responsibility now to make sure I'm happy, to make sure I am going in the path that is going to model the family system that I want to be in place and instill in my child.
So let's role play, okay? So I'm your father, and and then what do you say? What do you say to me?
Dad, I love you, and I want you to,
you said you.
Feel however
you said
you feel.
You said you. Once you say the word you, the first word, it doesn't matter what you're saying. And this is why you're so confused when you were talking to your mom.
Okay.
Because the minute that word you comes out, everything else after it. Because imagine, if this person were speaking on terms of let's think about the potential empathy that we can have for their conditioning, okay?
Okay.
And if your father has this communication pattern, okay? And how old is he?
He is 67.
Okay, so your father is 67 years old.
Yeah.
And he was born at here.
Yeah.
And I don't know his chemical makeup. I don't know his conditioning. But at some point, boy, did he have a father and a mother that said, you to him.
Oh, goodness.
How many times has he heard the word, you clean your room, you this, you that. And then, did he choose to compound it by finding a woman that was going to say, you, right back to him, so that he was comfortable replicating all of that.
That makes sense.
Very fascinating. Intrinsic, because now we're going to talk about potentially the next mate you meet will model how your daughter meets their next mate.
Okay.
Because this is
so
this
instead
is
of
what
saying I love you to him, what do I say?
What was happening? So this is what's interesting. In your so beautiful. I love your soul in your questions. It's so great. So what's happening? We're gonna do the chart. So you're gonna write your name. Okay.
Okay.
And within you as your instrument of Christianlyn, in your independent song that you're writing, you in that moment are having emotions. Is that what am I?
Yeah.
Okay, so write emotions under that.
Okay.
And you're having a reaction. So let's put reaction over on the left under it.
Okay.
And right now you have said that based off of the information that I have deducted and the silly stuff that I've said, you have now discerned that there is a proactive approach. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Within the reactive approach, you're visualizing lots of times that situation has happened within the moment of it happening, and you're in this state of comfort because that's where you know it's not knowing, that's what you're familiar with. You're familiar that when emotions arise in that format between father and daughter, and that dynamic between the two of you, you were reacting. But what you didn't understand before now is that you were reacting. because now there's an option of being proactive. And if you write under proactive, you can be proactive verbal, you can be proactive written, and I'm just giving you two options because that's what worked for me. I told you about Jenga. There's so many different things that can shift the temperature, and you take control of yourself rather than react to the emotions because it's familiar. So when you react, you're reacting to him. So when you're reacting to him, you tell him what he's doing.
Right.
Because you're
so
saying, I'm reacting.
You,
I need to tell you what you're doing
like
so I don't react. If you don't do what you're doing, I'm not going to react this way. But there's an opportunity, and this is where you're seeing it, is you're like, wait a second, this doesn't sound right to me. And you're going, how can I reword this? Right? So write under reaction in big letters, you. So you understand that every time moving forward in your articulation, potentially in the format and context of sentence and conversation, you may be projecting an internal ideology of what you believe the beneficial route of responding to the reaction. Because your response could be reactive or your response could be proactive. And so if we format a proactive response as to you feeling emotions, and potentially we move forward in this kinetic motion rather than potential. Potential is reaction. Potential! Why would you do this? I'm still. Versus motion.
Yeah.
Dad, you yelled, he yells at you and you say, I feel really, I'm sorry, I just feel really uncomfortable being spoken to like this. And then that's it. And that's what I just did is held space. Because he was attempting to hold space. He's drunk. Yeah. He's not drunk, but he's intoxicated in his nature of conditioning. And his version of holding space is going, la 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 la, and then he expects you to just I don't want to say submit because that's not applicable. He's just familiar that was what his parents did.
Right.
So he thinks,
and he used to me coming back at him the same way. So then, if I hold space, that will create.
What will it create? Dynamic. What will it create? It will create communication for him.
Yeah.
You guys are going really, really fast, and you're the first one to step out. Now he may be stepping out too, and you have no idea the conversations that he has with other people.
Right.
And so think about this in a sense of empathy, is that like potentially every single time that he talks to you, he holds it dear to his heart when you leave, that he's having a difficult time too. But he's 67 years in his conditioning. So he's looking at his reverse engineering and he's attempting to do the reparenting for himself. And every single time you come back over, the conversation starts well and, hey, it's going good and I love you and oh, it's been so long and 30 minutes goes by and then that one topic comes up and then you feel it tense up and then that's when ultimately the power and the will within you and your attachment and your proactive nature that seems to be compensated where you were attempting to fix him. You were attempting to understand him like you said earlier. And you weren't understanding yourself. Because in that moment, and you look back at all those times right now, every single time you tried again in the last however many years, and now you can look back with motion and kinetic love. This is very fascinating. If you look at love and put it next to motion, it's love emotion. That's amazing. Side note. Anyways, so you have an opportunity to look back and see those were all him reaching out to you. And that was his version. And based off of your conditioning and what you had familiar in your communication and how you respond to emotions, your response was to react and say you. And so now potentially you have an opportunity to respond proactively. And you can write him a letter, or you can speak to him in front of his face, and you say all those I statements. Because you are stating yourself and providing space. Because you love him, and you say, what do you say? And I go, ah, 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 I yell at you. What do you say back to your dad?
I don't feel comfortable right now with how this is going.
How I'm being spoken to. Because,
how I'm being spoken to. I don't feel comfortable.
So hear me out. You said how this is going. He's 67 years old, and he's never been approached like that.
Gotcha.
You're going to be potentially the first person that's going to be able to provide space like this. I don't know, but potentially.
Yeah.
So this is it's like somebody said not to use this the other day, but I'm going to use it. And it's like you're a soldier. And that's why I said you're in a militant state of healing, or you're in this militant nature, because you're up in arms, and you're this white divine queen in your tree system, where you see it and you discern it, and you're seeking motion. You are not choosing stagnant. You are not choosing to just detach, because that's where that devalue is. I'll just let it be. You said, no, I don't just let it be. I choose, as you said earlier, I am creating. You are creating. That's a big statement. And you said, I am. So own what's happening. Dad, I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable with how I'm being spoken to. Because what just happened is you said, Dad. You spoke to him and you got his attention. And you put your arms up. And he understands in a primal sense of nature that his body language, he will become aware that the level of discomfort is beyond words, and it is now within his body language and how he is looking at you.
Yeah.
And then when you start doing that and you provide that space for that interaction, you will understand more and more what you enabled and what you tolerated before.
That makes sense. Okay. That's perfect.
So, Dad, I am uncomfortable. You're owning your emotions. Okay. The emotions that you were conditioned to potentially not have ownership of. Because when you were having emotions, as you said to your mother, you visualize pictures and articulate through your verbal response what they did. And it's not it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility, because now you have discernment and you have some sort of awareness from how those values were being imposed and how you can choose new values and formulate this new value system to model for your child. So you own your emotions. Dad, I'm feeling uncomfortable. And then you articulate without any biased remark. It is an objective measure that I'm being spoken to this way. So you're uncomfortable. Okay. What are you uncomfortable? What's the emotion? Well, the emotion is in response to this. This is what's happening. And what's happening has nothing to do with you right now. It has everything to do with me, because I love you and I'm your daughter. And I'm going to tell you how I feel when I'm spoken to like this. And you'll be surprised at how that response goes. Because he may yell at you, or he may go, what? Because it's the first, that's what I'm saying, it may potentially be the first time that he has that space to have the inner dialogue. If he had 67 years of conditioning, and this is not you changing him, this is you changing yourself and understanding that there is an ability to monkey see, monkey do when you have a family system. And it's not fair for you to just cut your parents out of life. And that is my bias. My bias has now bled through. I don't believe that's fair. I have a father, and I have a mother. And I did not have a grandfather when I grew up. And
Right.
me being a man and having a son and understanding that there's 3 generations that are in the same city. There's a grandfather, there's a father, and there's a son that's a grandson. I'm not going to just, I choose not to have that level of my individuality of Stephen Nicholas Israel father, right? And within my value and chemical makeup, and I have that acceptance that I cut my dad out, I cut my son's grandfather out. That's not within my value system.
Right.
And that's why you sought me out, because I said something where our value systems were in alignment.
Absolutely.
In that one tiny little thing.
Yeah, because I don't want to cut him out. I don't want to cut my mom out. I don't want to cut brothers and sisters out based on the fact that my value system is different than everyone else's. I still want to hold space for each person because I love them unconditionally and I respect them for who they are, and I want them to be a part of our lives. That's it.
So here's the process of unbecoming and becoming again within this process, okay?
Okay.
Is the 3 strikes and then physical regulation. Literally understanding when your thermostat is being regulated by an imposition externally. If somebody else comes around you, if you find yourself with your father and you notice that your emotions are leaning towards that reactive measure that you're familiar of, then you have the opportunity to give yourself 3 strikes, not him. This has nothing to do with anybody else but yourself, your value system, and what you are building for you and your daughter. Because that's what you're doing. You are reaping what you sow. You have a garden, and you have established your garden. And you are inviting your other family into your garden. You are doing it. And if they want to come, it's up to them. And that's why I wrote him that letter, and I said in that letter, I am inviting you to my first Father's Day. Because this is not your Father's Day. This is my Father's Day. And I'm sure that other people will have some other, belief system on the bias that just bled through what I just said. But that was my system, and that's what worked for me, and what it was working for me, and that's me becoming and unbecoming. And I bring my son to my father's house every Sunday, and when I can, every Wednesday. Yeah. And I set the tone for myself. And if I notice that I become reactive, I say, Dad, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable with the way I'm being spoken to. And I give myself 1 strike. Because I strike myself when I notice that my internal dialogue, that's the first instrument, starts going there before I react and speak. Because the reaction in my head may as well be just as impotent as my reaction within my mouth. Because what I was doing and what I am still doing is in a constant process of becoming and unbecoming, because I have years of conditioning, because it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. And so every single time I'm going to go back to his house, I'm going to regulate myself. And sometimes I stay the whole time. And I fucking love it. But sometimes he's in his space. He had a bad day. Something happened. He had an argument with his wife. I came at a time that he woke up from a nap. Or I came at a time where he was very hungry and he was working outside. None of that has anything to do with me. Right. And I don't care what anybody says. If I find myself having a difficult time regulate my temperature, which is, in this sense is, if I myself am having a difficult time being proactive in my verbal response, and I notice that my internal response is reactive, I'm going to give myself 1 strike, and I'm going to verbalize this in an objective, non-biased fashion, so that that person that is attempting to impose their temperature on me They're trying to impose their value system on me. And it has nothing to do with you, and it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to take advantage of that opportunity and model for your daughter self-will and empowerment. Because right in that moment, you've had years and years and years of conditioning and compounding for her to show her this is how you react to your father. This is how you react to your mother. And what you'll do now is potentially have an opportunity to say, this is what I'm working on. What's your daughter's name?
Kamani.
You say, Kamani, I've done some soul searching, and I've done this, and I've done this. And what I found out is that I did this. And the idea is to take ownership in front of your daughter in constant sense. Because the minute that you externalize, she goes, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, mom externalizes, I externalize. The minute that you start internalizing and you take ownership and you show her vulnerability, she's going to fall in line because monkey see, monkey do. Just as you're finding out with yourself, as you're doing this healing pattern and you're looking at how you're communicating to your parents and how that is modeling down to your child and how your child ultimately communicates to her father. And the dynamic between all of these wonderful, beautiful things. And ultimately, what's so awesome about all of this, again, is that you're in motion. You're going. Like right now, as I just said what I said, you're writing.
Yes.
You understand the instrument. I am communicating to you. And within the communication, you are choosing the salt and the pepper and the condiments that you want out of the words that are being said, and you're putting action to it. You're not visualizing it.
Right.
And why I'm saying, is so you've tuned this response right now. And when the music happens like this, you go, oh, I'm going to write it down. So you tune written, right? And that's proactive. And so when you're having an emotional response, and the emotional response is in conjunction with you having the ability to empower yourself and learn something, which is what's happening here. You have this ability where you're empowering yourself, and you want to learn something, and you're having these internal emotions. And rather than telling me, because other people do this, other people project it back at me. Oh no, you're wrong, and you do this, and you do that, and blah, 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 blah. And that's wonderful, and that's great, and I understand that, and that's where they're at, and you are where you are. Mm-hmm. And so you're proactive to this emotional response to the information and the conversation that you and I are having is you're in a different format of tuning because of how your tree was collected. So now let's show commendation to that you learned from your parents. Because if you can tap into what I just said for your parents, it'll make sense for them. Of how powerful they are. And how you are doing what you're doing now only by mere fact that they did what they did to get you where you are, to be in a generation where you can Google anything, and that's what you've done. You've become a hyper-intelligent, emotionally intelligent individual to a point where you've gotten to these last few facets for yourself where you've done all of the external work. And I'm saying that with a weighted word. You've done all the external work. So much so that now you are forced in this conversation to look really deep within yourself and figure out how you can continue this reparenting process for yourself, and then hold space and then understand the willpower of not attaching like you used to. Because when you get to the third strike, and the first time you walk out that door, you just have to keep walking. Don't turn around. Don't say the last word thing. Don't try to get it out, because the space will be there for the barking.
Okay.
And they're going to keep barking. Or they're not. Mm-hmm. Or they're not, because I don't know your father. Maybe you do this and they reserve back and they sit on the couch and say, cool, okay. And then you go, that was beautiful. Because what happened was potentially I provided space, and he saw that I was providing space for myself. Ultimately, you're providing space for yourself to have a proactive response rather than a reactive response. And he may discern that because you came from him, right? He's intelligent just like you are. So
right.
he may go back the minute you put your hands up, right? Because if he's so reserved and inclusive, that's what's so fascinating is that he may be ready for this.
Right.
And he'll just open up, cry, tears. That's what I'm saying, like, and I'm just throwing stuff out so that you understand that, like, don't prepare yourself for anything other than yourself. Prepare for yourself. You're going to walk in the house and you know in your understanding that you don't know. You have a really profound understanding that based on the information that you've been provided, based off of the experiences that you've had in the past, you're familiar that when the emotions get to this, the response may potentially get to this, and I will add an internal strike system for myself. When I do the internal strike system, the first time I'm going to say, Dad, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable with the way I'm being spoken to. And then if it continues to go, you go, Dad, I'm really sorry. I just don't feel comfortable with the way I'm being spoken to. And then if it keeps going, you say, Dad, I don't feel comfortable with the way I'm being spoken to. I'm going to go ahead and leave. And I really look forward to coming back X. And mine is every Sunday, because before that, it was every month. Okay? And you have control over yourself. And you are setting the tone for your daughter to assist with her in modeling how you take control of your own actions, how you regulate your own emotions, how you regulate your own value system, how you build your own value system. Because what will happen is she's going to watch all of this wonderful growth and say, whoo-wee, I'm excited to make my own value system. And what you'll do, this is what's interesting, is you now potentially become grandma. And the intrinsic value of becoming and unbecoming resets all over again. Because when you thought you knew everything as a mama, when you become grandma, you're like, oh no. Because then you're going to attempt to impose your value system as a mom to the value system of her as a mom, not understanding, just as what's happening right now, how your father doesn't understand your new value system.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
You did it.
I received it.
You did it.
Thank you so much.
Take a deep breath.
Yep.
Thank you. I really appreciate you allowing the space for this to happen.
Thank you. Thank you for teaching me and guiding me through this moment in life. I appreciate it so much.
I have been a teacher before, I've been an instructor before, and I've been a coach. And I want to respectfully say that I didn't teach you anything. I didn't guide you. I didn't guide you through anything. You and I had a conversation that you were interested in having.
Yes.
Based off of the conversation that you and I had, you selected the information that you felt was beneficial for yourself. This had nothing to do with me teaching you. This had nothing to do with me guiding you. Because if it wasn't me, it would have been someone else or something else or at some other divine time. And my intention with all of this is to not attach me, is to attach yourself. That you've been tuning yourself for empowerment your entire life. And what the conversation has provided for you is some sort of remembrance and articulation for you now to parent yourself where you weren't parented in the most profound version you could possibly have now. And when I get off the phone, it's up to you. And you know that. And ultimately it's so cool because you took notes. You have a literal, you have your own, this is exactly what this system was made for, is to have a simple conversation and then find individuals that are finding individuals. I'm not
Yeah.
finding individuals that are not finding it.
Right.
I set the intention of divine love and whatever you want to say, and I use those words because it's beautiful and wonderful, and I connect to the way that those words vibrate. And it provided this opportunity for you and I to connect, and ultimately I'm learning a lot too. Because of me speaking my story and conviction and finding more individuals that are like you, that are finding more individuals.
Yeah.
So this was a complete collaborative, cooperative example of human potential.
Mm-hmm.
That when we connect and we drop all guard and we drop everything aside, and we have two individuals that have two stories that can communicate to each other and provide some sort of systematic approach to reparenting yourself. Because this is what you just did for yourself. Within you establishing this format for yourself, now you can tune for your own internal empowerment rather than external or imposed empowerment. And it's now this articulate, systematic approach to you reparenting yourself every single day, every single moment. You having the opportunity, ultimately, to time travel as we did in this moment.
Yeah.
Because you have the potential remembrance and understanding and sight and smell and all these senses. I'm going to continue to recite that it wasn't just one thing. You were doing all these wonderful things all in accordance for yourself to make your orchestra, to tune your heartbeat and your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts and internal thought, all of these wonderful things for you to get to where you are and have this personalized system that's yours. This is all yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being a vessel, because I can't take it just for myself. I have to give you credit for having the skill set and the ability to help me, because you may not see it as teaching, because I have a little bit of background in teaching also, but what you did open, you held space for me in a way that I've never held space for myself. So through that, it has left a profound memory. It has left a profound statement within myself that's going to help generations to come, that's coming from my bloodline. So I appreciate you for allowing yourself to be used as a vessel for me. And it doesn't just sit here with us. It's going to spread. It's going to continue to recycle itself over and over again through the values that we have individually, collectively, and relatively close. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I appreciate it so much. And I look forward to the Clubhouse rooms you're going to have. I look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to step away. Have a great night.
Thank you, you too.
Good night.